this slide is for me in case I get nervous and forget to say hi. But hi, I'm Kritika. I'm a graphic designer and illustrator, but I've been making comics over the past 2 years, mostly based on personal experiences and also to deal with, I think, the four essential things for every struggling artist. Um, so these are just some of my personal comics. Um, a lot of them are around how awkward I am in social situations. This is 180 degrees, but it's not meant to be like this. Uh, it's about finding purpose in your work. Um, okay, and again, this is about existential crisis. I've been doing things like this over the past 2 years or so, but I think Priya Kurian, who's in the audience, was kind enough to invite me for the spring residency last year, where I met a lot of amazing German illustrators and other Indian illustrators. Reshu is also in the audience. And all of us worked on writing our own stories and illustrating them. Mine was, this is also a part of the exhibition, and we also talked a little bit about it yesterday. Mine was on the story of my grandmother who, she and her father were a part of the freedom movement, but there were all these politics at home where she was not so free. So the whole story kind of explores that. Also, at the residency, Priya introduced me to this book, Seeing Like a Feminist, Nivedita Menon's bestseller, I think. And this book, in turn, introduced me to many other books and reading resources. So at this point, I think I was reading a lot of feminist text, and I had no idea how to process all of these information. So I did two projects, I think, over the last year, which are influenced on because of reading these things. One of which is the 36 Days of Type series. It's an A to Z of the feminist alphabet. It explores different concepts of feminism, but I've not included it in this presentation because it's not really comics. But I also worked with this organization in Bombay called Taxi Fabric. This is also not a traditional comic format, but each surface of the auto rickshaw kind of told the story of one women leader in India who was fighting for various causes within their communities. And a lot of these women are marginalized, and their stories never come out in the mainstream. Nobody talks about them. So the auto rickshaw kind of became the perfect medium to talk about these things because a lot of people travel through it. And it was also really nice because the person who drives the rickshaw was interested in the stories of these women, and I got to meet him and speak to him a little bit about this. And he then started talking about these stories with the passengers who traveled in his rickshaw. Um, Also, earlier this year, I worked on a story for Strapazine for their Indian edition. The cover is by Arijit Sen, who is one of the pioneers of Indian graphic novels. My story was about this was a issue on Indian nonfiction. It was not a political story, but it was a very personal issue of identity crisis. I've grown up in a lot of cities in India, and the idea of home is a little confusing. So the story kind of explores what home is. Is it in the little memories you have growing up? Is it in the things that you inherit from your ancestors? Is it in the food that your mom cooks that you miss when you're away from home? It's things like that. So coming back to, I think, the title for my talk, which is "The Personal is Political," which of course we all know was the slogan for the second wave feminist movement. I think a great man, Aristotle, kind of said, "Man by nature is a political animal." With all due respect to him, uh, I think I would like to make a small edit, which would be women by nature are political animals. Because if you think about it, you're always, when you're a woman, I think everybody feels like they can tell you what to do. Your every move is judged. Like, you're resisting by just living, I think. And some of my work is also based on these things. So India recently introduced this thing called goods and service tax, which is very poorly planned. There are no taxes on some ridiculous items, but there are taxes on some essential things like sanitary napkins. We've had 23 meetings, and this has never been a topic of discussion because there are no women on this panel. So some of my comics are also commentary like this. This was last year, the Syria crisis. I've also recently been working with this organization in Delhi called the YP Foundation, who are doing amazing advocacy work for comprehensive sexual education. Unfortunately, it's banned in India, but they're doing work with urban and rural schools, and they're talking to the youth there about why it's important. So as a part of a few campaigns that I'm working with them, I made a few comics. This series is about, this addresses different people, like your parents, classmates, peers, and it kind of advises you on how you should talk about some taboo topics. Like this one on the top, there's a young girl asking her mom what porn is, and her mom is very shocked. She says, "I'd rather die than listen to you talk about these things." So that's like a no. And then there is a suggested way of kind of approaching the subject with your children. This is similarly like in a classroom environment. This happened to all of us, right? Like in biology class, the reproduction lesson is always skipped. So this is a man, this is a woman, and there's a child suddenly. So similarly, here there is a very oversmart kid who's asking his teacher what intersex means, and he's like, "This is not in your syllabus, don't ask me." So again, that's a no, and there is a suggested text of how teachers can approach the subject. Similarly, for siblings, there's a younger sibling asking the older sibling what a condom is because she's about to do it with her friend. And the sibling is like, "You're too young for this, I'm going to complain to Ma." And then there's a text of how she can talk about it instead. I've also recently been working with this organization, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They do a lot of work with women who've started their own movements in South Asia and South Africa. So I'm illustrating 3 stories for them. This is a story about, I'm sure a lot of people living in India have heard of her. She started a petition last year against the passport rules. There was a rule that you cannot, a minor cannot get a passport without his father's name on it, but she was a single mother. So, and her daughter was denied passport, so she started a petition on change.org requesting them to remove this rule, and she got a lot of media attention and help from a lot of NGOs, and she finally managed to do it. So this is 1 out of 3 stories that I'm kind of illustrating for them. Yeah, that's it.